Dr. Cabral, welcome back to our show. One of our most, I'd say shared people. People really love your stuff, so it's always great to have you on the show.
I appreciate that. That's great.
So today, we're going to talk about inflammation. In my opinion, this has to be the topic of inflammation, has to be one of the most maybe misunderstood topics in health, because we're constantly told that inflammation is just bad, hammer it down, don't have any inflammation. Mm-hmm. I know through fitness that inflammation is a signaler for things like muscle growth and repair, and that hammering inflammation can actually cause problems as well. So let's just start with inflammation. What is inflammation? What does it do? Why do we have it? Is it good, bad?
Yeah, a lot of people think of inflammation predominantly with the acute phase of inflammation, which is the fever or the heat on the skin, or it's happening from an injury. And so working out is actually an injury to the body, right? So you're breaking down at a microscopic level muscle tissue, and that muscle tissue then needs to repair. And so there's two parts to that process. There's the repair process, but then there's also the cleaning out process. So when you do break down muscle fiber, white blood cells have to come in. They actually have to remove the damages and make sure that the senescent cells are actually removed from the body. If not, it causes more inflammation. Same happens with skin-based aging. So if those skin cells, and they actually have peptides now to help remove those senescent cells, you're going to end up aging faster, and you're going to have a lot more inflammation, which it does lead to more muscle soreness, but it actually leads to what's called exercise dysfunction, or the inability to get a lot of the benefits from exercise because you're always exhausted from it. So you have what's called like flu-like symptoms, or myalgic encephalomyelitis. So myalgic encephalomyelitis, and I don't want to go off on the deep end here, is basically you go to do a workout and you feel so exhausted the next day, it almost feels like you have the flu. And some people have that. That's exaggerated inflammation. We can't have that, but you need some level of inflammation to actually build back up the muscles. And the last part I'll say to this is that if you do a lot of the cold plunges directly after your workout, or you do things like take a NSAID, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like Advil, you're actually hurting your gains and your transformation in the long run.
Yeah, I've read studies on that where people who use NSAIDs on a consistent basis to help them work out, right? So athletes who are pushing it really hard or whatever, they find that they build less muscle, and they have increased risks of things like tendon ruptures and ligament tears. Is that because they've blunted the signal so much that the repair process is just not as efficient or effective?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's incomplete repair. And so again, there's two parts to that as well. If it's not a complete repair of the muscle, tendon, or ligament, what you're also left with is more scar tissue. So there's less scar tissue in children for a few reasons. They have much better in-check inflammation. They have higher levels of growth hormone, which is going to help improve everything from stem cell function to repair to rejuvenation to improvements in sleep. So it's vitally important as we age, we do the right things like not blunt the inflammation, but also not take it so far. So one of the biggest, I would say, examples is when someone's taken 2 months off from working out, 3 months off from working out, they're like, oh, I'm just going to dive back in, and they do a full workout and they're super sore. And their body now has to recover from that major workout, where they don't necessarily get much more benefit from doing that than they would have easing back into it, because it's called a graduated exercise protocol. So you do a little bit at first, you gauge, am I sore the next day? Yes or no. If there's no real soreness, you can continue to increase from there. So we do that a lot in a clinical practice as well, because if you do have someone with like long COVID or myalgic encephalomyelitis or Addison's, whatever you want to say, okay, we're going to start with walking. We're going to move it up to then aerobic-based cardio, and then body weight anaerobic, and then we're going to move it up to HIIT and sprint training, those types of things.
Okay. Is it safe to say that inflammation, there's a sweet spot essentially, that too much isn't good, too little isn't good? Because you talked a little bit about what too much inflammation looks like.
Yeah,
we'll get back to that. But what does too little feel like?
I want to ask Cabral to explain something, because he's in that space right now, and it's something that you share on the show all the time. And Sal explains this really well in layman's term, and I'd like to hear you explain more in depth, like what's happening. We talk about people getting stuck in what we call a recovery trap, where it's like there's this sweet spot of training, and a lot of people don't realize that more is not always better. What is it that caused you to get, quote unquote, what Sal would say, the recovery trap, where your body's constantly trying to recover. It's not really adapting and growing and building.
Yeah. And that's the complicated part about this, is that it's not one thing. And so we're looking at, I call this the de-stress protocol, but it sums it up. So it's, what does your diet look like? your exercise, your stress, meaning like how stressed are you outside of the gym? Like, so that's a hermetic stressor, right? So when we do really hot sauna, really cold plunge, we do a really hard workout, anything pushes our body beyond the limit is a hermetic stressor. And so that's actually a good thing. And we'll kind of come back to your point about what's too little inflammation, because if you have no hermetic stressors in life, then you just fly off the deep end whenever you do a counter one because you can't handle it. And that causes exaggerated inflammation. So you actually need small bouts to stay healthy and age at a much better degree. So, but we have toxins as well, heavy metals. We chatted a little bit about that before the show. So that's kind of building up inflammation, the emotional stress that I talked about, and then a lack of nutrients. So vitamins, minerals, omegas that help balance overall inflammation. So when someone is kind of moving into that recovery-based zone, it's saying, well, you're just not eating well enough. And I have a hard time with that because we have so much information now along eating that most people have at least a basis of where to start. And so their nutrition's pretty good. So obviously we're looking at nutrition first, but then we're saying you've met a threshold for some very strange reason that we need to dig deeper on. So I always say this, if you do 5 exercises and you only do 1 set and it's just body weight, how much less can you really do? Right? Like you can't do a whole lot less than that. So it's like, okay, you could do 3 exercises. So we start there and you're still inflamed. Okay, well, we're looking then at a much deeper immunological based issue that we need to take care of as to why you're getting inflamed from just body weight exercises.
Right. So it's like, my gosh, I'm scaling everything down so much. There's got to be some other reason. It can't just be that I'm deconditioned. There's got to be some other stuff going on.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned things like nutrients. You talked about supplements. You mentioned omega-3s, and we can get there. But what that leads to the following question, which is, or assumption that nutrients can either be pro, or foods more broadly can be either pro or anti-inflammatory. In other words, they may contain compounds that enhance the inflammatory process, or they may contain compounds that blunt or reduce the inflammatory process. So we've got that balance.
Yes.
Let's start with the pro-inflammatory foods first. What do those look like, and what is it in these foods that encourage the inflammation to happen?
Yeah, and so if people don't really know what inflammation is, it's important to understand that it is a function essentially of the immune system. It's not typically the immune system messing up. It is actually going after something that it sees as pathogenic in the body, or we consume a food that's highly inflammatory that then causes, and these are the symptoms that people should look for if they're not lab testing, brain fog, fatigue, grogginess upon waking, that exercise intolerance that I spoke about before. You shouldn't be sore all the time after every workout. I mean, if you're doing like 10 by 10s, like, if you're doing something like hard, I get it, I understand. But if you're doing a normal workout and you're always sore and exhausted the next day, there's absolutely a very high inflammation-based score.
Dr. Cabral, on that, not to interrupt, but on that, would you say a good signal for that or flag would be, I've worked out like this for so long, all of a sudden the same workout, and not a lot of other stuff in my life has changed. All of a sudden I have an intolerance to what was usually a normal, like totally tolerable workout. Would that be like a red flag? Like, okay, something's going on.
100%.
Okay.
And it's like, if you do the same volume, you can look at it that way. And now you're getting a different effect on your body, this time negative because your recovery is worse. Then there's absolutely, it's not the workout. There's something else going on inside your body.
Got it. Okay. So let's get back to the pro-inflammatory, I guess, compounds in foods. What do those look like, and what's making them pro-inflammatory?
Yeah. So the reason for the low mood, low energy, low libido, low drive is your body's inflamed. It's exhausted. And so, because if you're always fighting against inflammation, your body's always has a war zone going inside of it. So the most pro-inflammatory foods, and we do have to put foods at the top of the list because this is the easiest way to decrease inflammation or increase inflammation in your body, like 100%.
Really?
So the most oxidative-based foods, the highest inflammatory foods are going to be vegetable-based oils. So safflower oil, sunflower oils, soybean oils, canola oils. These are highly inflammatory, I don't even want to call them foods, process-based foods that are ubiquitous in the standard American diet. But it's not just America. Like I've done internships in China and India. Canola oil is everywhere. And so if that and soy is now becoming prevalent all over the world, it's not hard to imagine now, well, the skyrocketing rates of heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and cancer have gone up because those were all inflammatory-based diseases as well. And they claim the lives of over 75% of us. And so it's really important that we focus on even if you look and you're functioning fine and you don't have a whole lot of those symptoms, the inflammation can actually be in the arteries. And a lot of that is from the, and I don't want to say seed oils as much because that does matter. When you take a nut or you take seeds and you turn them into an oil, there's a really volatile process that takes place. And that's what creates an oxidative stress in the body. Oxidation in the body means that your body's literally rusting from the inside out, creating free radicals, which is then robbing your body of a lot of the nutrients that you need. So for us, it's removing those first. The nuts and seeds, which we'll talk about in a moment, are actually not pro-inflammatory. They're anti-inflammatory. You turn them into an oil, now they become pro-inflammatory.
So it's the process of making them an oil that does that.
The end product of that is, yes, exactly, of that is what you get.
All right, everybody, it's the final hours for the MAPS Anabolic Advanced launch special. So I'm going to give away another free MAPS Anabolic Advanced program. Here's how you can win. Leave a comment below this video in the first 24 hours that we drop this episode. Also, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. If you win, we'll let you know in the comment section. Everybody else, MAPS Anabolic Advanced is still on sale for the next few hours when this episode drops. That means it's a discounted price, plus you get 2 free ebooks. So instead of paying the retail price of $157, you only pay $97, and you get the Advanced Training Techniques ebook and the Carb Cycling Diet ebook. Okay, so if you're interested, go to anabolicadvanced.com and then use the coupon code AA60 for the discount and the free giveaways. All right, here comes the show.
Now, are there any beneficial effects to some of these inflammatory foods, or are there examples of that? And because from what I'm gathering is it's probably better for you to focus on getting that hormetic kind of stress, that bit from exercise versus like getting that from food.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. So you actually get benefits from exercise because you rebuild stronger. So that's one of the whole points of exercise is you're continuing to tell your cells in your body that you are young. I mean, that's the biggest part to it. So a lot of people say, yes, it's the aesthetics and all that. That's fine. But you should be weight training your entire life in order to be able to kill off the old cells faster, kill off the old mitochondria faster because they can't keep up. And then your body says, oh, well, if this is the demand on the body, I need to produce stronger mitochondria, stronger cells. And so that's really important. And then going back to the food then, well, there are inflammatory foods. So arachidonic acid is an inflammatory food. So meat, for the most part, and we'll talk about that, and dairy is typically inflammatory. But I learned this a long time ago. I actually used to write for Condé Nast, Self, I forget the other one. They were all kind of one conglomerate. And I was commissioned by them for 3 years to write a daily article as part of their 4-person team. And the head of that team, I was super young. I was like in my early 20s. I was just lucky to have the position, the job. She knew it all about inflammation-based ratings. She was a PhD, and she actually, for her not thesis, but basically her paper for a PhD, she went through the inflammation rating of foods. And so what I realized was, yes, there is a whole list of anti-inflammatory foods, but your body actually does function best if it does have some of those inflammatory-based foods because there's actual healthy properties to them. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is balance inflammation. So it's not like the whole thing about moderation I don't necessarily agree with. I agree with like balance for each individual. Some individuals can do much better with more meat in their diet because they're more athletic, they work out more, they are repairing their tissue more. You don't need that if you're prone to gaining 50, 60, 100 pounds, and you need something maybe a little bit more catabolic. So as we start to talk about like the arachidonic acid and the higher levels of that in meat and saturated fats in general, it's not that you should be devoid of that. It's just you need to balance that with the anti-inflammatory.
Have you seen the studies on arachidonic acid and muscle gain?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That was a supplement for a while where you could buy it, and I don't remember what it was called. It was something X. I remember I took it as a kid because
what did you not take?
Had a guy with a lab coat.
I had a friend.
Yeah. So, they sold it why? Because there were studies that showed that people who supplemented with arachidonic acid, and of course these were small studies, and healthy college-age males, built significantly more muscle and were stronger. Now, when you went on the forums, people would say, yeah, I'm getting more muscular and I'm stronger, but man, I'm really sore and it's really interesting. I supplemented with it because like as a kid, I took anything that I thought would help me build muscle, and it made my joints, this was as a 17, 18-year-old kid, made my joints feel stiff, and I just did not feel good. and I had to stop taking it. And of course, looking back, it's like my inflammation went through the roof with it, because I also eat a lot of red meat on top of it. And I know red meat is a natural source of arachidonic acid. So really interesting, really strange. Now on this, on inflammation, and you're talking about how it affects the organs and the heart, what we're really looking at are kind of low levels of excessive inflammation. So you're not in that sweet spot. It's a little higher than it should be. And if you look at it from an acute, standpoint, not going to do too much bad to you. But you do this over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then you start to see some damage and some problems. You mentioned heart disease. When the arteries are slightly inflamed, from what I've understood, and I've always wanted to bring this out. In fact, I've wanted to ask you about this for a long time. From what I understand, your body uses cholesterol as a way to bolster the walls of your arteries, almost like spackle, to kind of prevent what's happening to cause any problems. And then over time, that becomes a problem. And that's what we get. That's when we get heart attacks. Did I say that right?
100%. But here, so that's why cholesterol and heart disease, and we'll say it's atherosclerosis, where we get the hardening of the arteries.
Yes.
So, let's think of it this way. Like, people like to say arachidonic acid is the bad guy. No, cholesterol is the bad guy. And it's like, well, that's not how it works. And the reason is that not everybody who has high levels of cholesterol has a heart attack, right? It's only like 50% of the people.
Yeah.
Well, the other 50% of people don't have high cholesterol. So how is that possible? Well, it's because there's so many layers to this. So there's LDL, which is the more oxidized based cholesterol. It's actually just a low density, and what it means is that it actually falls to the surface of the artery, the endothelial tissue, like you were just saying. So when there's inflammation, it needs to be patched. And that's really it. If not, literally the artery itself, the wall will collapse or explode. So it uses that, but it also uses calcium. And here's the interesting part. So calcium, calcified tissues, right, becomes hard.
Yeah.
So now, because cholesterol is not necessarily hard, it's just like glue. It's like toothpaste. And so that by itself, that's fairly flexible, though as it builds up, you can't push the blood through as well. And when eventually it's completely occluded, okay, well, that artery no longer functions. And so now we have occluded artery. And now we're talking about like double, triple, quadruple bypass, right? So that you're trying to open up all these arteries. And they've got some really wild medical interventions now for that, like things that literally look like corkscrews that go through. It's wild.
By the way, the reduction in deaths from heart attacks, I had a cardiovascular surgeon that I trained for a while, and he said that it was one of the greatest breakthroughs. They can actually put a device in the artery, close off two ends, put an anticoagulant in there, and literally like roto-root everything, and then have it wash out. And he says that, because I asked him, I said, "Do you think these statins have reduced lots of heart deaths?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "It's this," and he told me, he goes, "That really made a big difference." Kind of wild.
I'm very suspect on statins. It causes cardiomyopathy. It weakens the heart. You can die from a weak heart, just like you can die from heart attack, high cholesterol. But why this is important is because we can't look at cholesterol alone. We actually have to look at these high levels of omega-6s, create an inflammation in the arteries. And then as those arteries become stiffer, well, now what are the main causes or what could that lead to? Okay, hypertension and cardiovascular risk. So now those are the two main reasons for all mortality. Right. So it's like those are the top two. Then after that, it's diabetes, and then there's cancer. And so when we look at inflammation can cause diabetes as well. So this is really important to look at this particular topic. And the other reason why I bring up arachidonic acid is because your first symptom, and I heard this not too long ago, the first symptom of a heart attack, I don't know if you guys know what this is. It's pretty wild. It's not pain and numbness in the left arm or, a little bit of stiffness or flushness or fever. The main symptom of a oncoming heart attack is actually sudden death. And that's the wild thing about it. Wow. Meaning there's no symptom for over 50% of the people.
Oh, right.
Oh, wow.
And so there's no second chance. There's no getting to the hospital. That's it.
There's no warning.
And 25% of the people who will have a heart attack, 75% of those people are men, but 25% of those people will have that before the age of 55. And so it's not just something that we should think about when we get into our 60s when it's most prevalent, right? Because common age for a heart attack in a male is around 65. In a woman, it's around 72, 73. But 25% of those are before the age of 55. And so this is why I bring it up for your audience now. It's pay attention to it nobody's gonna pay attention to their 20s. It'd be great if they did. Yeah. But 30s, 40s, because you don't get occluded arteries 2 years before you have a heart
Is
attack.
that getting worse or better? Like, is that number coming down? Was it like 55, 60, 70 before, and now it's in its 50s? Are we getting worse or better in that situation?
We're getting worse. And you can look at the early 1900s versus the early 2000s, or we're kind of moving out of that pace now. And heart attacks was not one of the top, killers back then. And so that's why you can't just blame it on food, like meat alone. Like that's not fair to do that, because I think back in the day, there was also just less consumption. So like you could eat foods, you were more active. Activity plays such a huge role in this, of telling your muscles that they actually need more protein. So think of it this way: standard American diet, you're eating lots of meat, lots of fat, lots of grains. All right, so very high in arachidonic acid and omega-6s. But you're not training, you're not exercising, and so there's no uptake in protein synthesis. There's no need for any of these things, and so it just goes to what? Well, just pure inflammation. So arachidonic acid increases something called prostaglandin series 2. Very, very inflammatory, and that is what Advil or natural herbs do to kind of block that. So there's something called butterbur and quercetin, which you guys have probably talked about before. Those things are all kind of natural anti-inflammatory. Stinging nettles, which you could use instead of the Advil if you choose to. Again, I have to give my disclaimer now. I'm not here to provide any medical advice, medical treatment plans, medical cures, but we can look into that as alternatives. My recommendation is balance your omega-3s to your omega-6s, so you don't have to really worry about the food end of it, as much.
Speaking of supplements, you mentioned statins earlier. What do you think of red yeast rice extract? That's a natural statin from what I understand. And I've had friends and clients who, were told that they needed to lower their total cholesterol. Take that, you can buy it over the counter, and effectively lower their numbers just from taking that over the counter. Is it as bad as a statin for you, or is it better because it's more natural? Over the counter is exactly the same.
Yeah. So I just did this on my podcast last week. I talked about this, and it's because there was a medical doctor. I don't know what company they work for, but they came out and they said that nutritional supplements for lowering cholesterol do not work. And I said, okay, challenge accepted. Went on, and because we've been using this in our practice for years, and I'm like, I don't have the studies off the top of my head, and I'm like, okay, here we go. Red yeast rice. I'll get back to that in just a second. Believe it or not, cinnamon, berberine, garlic, like all these different things lower cholesterol in supplement form. And so in my practice, what we always did was red yeast rice and Kyolic garlic. There's a company called Kyolic, and that's the type of garlic. It was 104. It has the lecithin in it because the lecithin is really powerful as well. And so, from a clinical perspective, I can tell you that it absolutely works. Now, I also don't believe that you need to be on those supplements for all that long, 3 to 6 months. And that's because through other interventions, you can actually get to the root cause as to why your levels may have been elevated in the first place. Now, back to statins. What is statin? It's an extract of red yeast rice. So the fact that this doctor said that red yeast rice doesn't work, blew my mind. I was just like, are we even having this conversation? I'm like, do you know what the extract from a statin is? You can look it up. It's red yeast rice.
No, the studies on rest, it's super established that it'll for sure lower your cholesterol.
100%. Yeah.
100%. What about psyllium husk? So every time I get blood work done, my cholesterol numbers come back, and the doctor always comments and says, this is some of the best numbers I've ever seen. Now I eat, and we'll see what my inflammation test comes back. So I might
you're really boosting yourself.
No comment.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But from a cholesterol standpoint, my numbers always look phenomenal. I've been using psyllium husk regularly now for probably 10 years. It helps with my gut health issues. And I know that studies show that it does lower cholesterol. Is that because it reduces cholesterol that you absorb through the gut, or how is it working?
That's correct.
Okay.
So anybody, on a low carb diet, if you're on a higher meat diet, lower carb diet, call it carnivore, call it whatever you want, your LDL cholesterol numbers typically go up. Typically HDL goes up as well, but your LDL definitely goes up. And part of that is that especially if you're in more of a state of ketosis, your body's going to use something called acetyl coenzyme A, and it's going to use that as a precursor to ketones or a precursor to cholesterol because it makes both. And so you're making all this acetyl coenzyme A, which is coming from a vitamin B5 precursor as well. And then your cholesterol is going to what? Well, it's going to your testosterone, cortisol, estrogen, progesterone, all your other numbers.
It's a base molecule.
That's right. So like that's the starting point. That's your building block. That's your clay. But what happens is there's so much circulating cholesterol if you're eating a lot of it in your diet or your liver's producing it because you're on a lower carb diet too, that it just says, okay, we're going to move this down to what's called the terminal ileum. That's the end of your small intestine before it goes into your cecum. That's the first part of your colon. So the reason why I say that, your small intestine's 21 feet long, about 21 feet. So it's long. So it puts it at the very end specifically through a duct from the liver to the intestine. And then it immediately just moves it out of the body. The problem is, for a lot of people, it gets reabsorbed. And so that's why you have higher circulating levels. That can be a problem. So by taking psyllium husk, there's not a lot of magic behind it, except that it creates bulk in the stool. It absorbs the cholesterol itself and draws it out of the body.
Okay.
So it's very beneficial.
Interesting.
Yeah, very beneficial.
All right, so we talked about inflammatory foods. You mentioned seed oils and the process of turning a seed into an oil makes them inflammatory. What about anti-inflammatory foods? The obvious ones that come to mind are like wild caught, salmon, and things high in omega-3s,
Yes.
and green leafy vegetables. Like, what are foods that you can eat to reduce your inflammatory load?
The way because I like to really make this actionable for people is that it's the Mediterranean diet without the pasta and bread. And so what you're left with is
a
berries.
Mediterranean diet that's not nearly as fun.
That's right. So I try to live a Mediterranean diet, but then like on a Friday, I'll have the fun stuff. Friday night, I'll have pasta and bread because I love that. And I'm always going to eat it. If you stay a healthy, well-balanced individual, you can absolutely enjoy a flex meal once or twice a week. There's no doubt about that. So when we look at it, it's brightly colored fruits and vegetables. So it's your berries, lower glycemic, it's your lettuces, it's your, believe it or not, tomatoes and peppers are very powerful anti-inflammatories. People right away will jump to the fact, well, those are nightshades, which they are, like they absolutely are. But unlike the their cousin, which are like the deadly nightshades. These are nightshades that contain solanine or solanine. And these are triggers in some people, but not everyone. It's probably less than 10% of the population.
And well-tolerated nightshades.
Well-tolerated, yes. And they contain lycopene, which is a really powerful, great antioxidant for men because it helps with inflammation of the prostate. So it's like we don't necessarily need to stay away. I don't eat a lot of tomatoes. I don't eat a lot of peppers because, although I love hot sauce, it is anti-inflammatory because for me, they affect me more, but that's not everybody, right? So that's some individuals. So Mediterranean diet, brightly colored fruits and vegetables, a lot of wild caught fish. Most powerful ones are sardines, wild salmon, trout, anchovies, mackerel with the skins on, believe it or not. And I want to talk more about that when we get to the labs because you see not a 1 or 2x, it's more like a 5x in results when you eat the skin where a lot of the omega-3s are.
Oh, I didn't know that. What about fish roe?
Yeah, fish roe, powerful omega-3.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. All right, so that's good. So, all right, we'll see what these tests look like. It's pretty. What about olive oil? Is olive oil, because our friend Max Lugavere, a good friend of ours, and I love talking about this kind of stuff. He's very well informed. He says olive oil is like magic. He's like, it's such an incredible oil. Would that be considered an anti-inflammatory?
In my opinion, the most powerful anti-inflammatory.
Really?
And way more than a lot of people using avocado oil now. It's not even close. Avocado oil has more omega-6s than omega-3s. Not saying it's bad. Like we still need omega. I don't want to demonize omega-6s.
Yeah, they're essential, right?
Yeah, they're essential.
Fatty acid. Okay.
Yeah, well, like 100%. We need omega-6s, and actually, most balanced humans, like really well balanced, are about a 3-to-1, and healthy can be a 5-to-1. So of omega-6s to omega-3s. So it's not that we don't need omega-6s. We do. It's just that the standard American diet provides about an 18-to-1 omega-6s to omega-3s. And so now we're so lopsided in terms of inflammation, but we actually need them for cell membranes. We need them for the nervous system. So omega-6s are very, very important. Olive oil, I didn't believe this. Like I'm just by nature, I'm very skeptical. So I said, the best oils to cook with have to be like animal fats, right? It has to be butter. It has to be lard. It has to be tallow. It has to be these types of things. And so I said, okay, well, let's just prove that. And so that's what I did, or coconut oil, because they have a higher smoke point. So I went in, I actually looked at the studies, looked at the research, and that is absolutely true. The problem is that olive oil has something very unique about it. It's not the highest smoke point, but it contains an antioxidant that most others don't called oleic acid. And oleic acid prevents it from oxidizing at the same level as the others. So it's actually healthier to cook with olive oil. Now, again, try not beyond a medium heat. Or when you're marinating meat, you can marinate in olive oil and it will help to reduce acrylamides, which are really carcinogenic on meat when cooked on like a grill or something like that.
Wow.
So olive oil, 100%, the best.
Wait, hold on. So if I'm barbecuing meat, because I've always heard that, right? If you barbecue and it gets a little charred, it's carcinogenic. So I could put olive oil on the meat and then barbecue it, and the olive oil will help protect against some of that.
Yeah, it will reduce it.
No shit.
Oh, wow.
That's a great little hack.
That's
I started
phenomenal.
doing that for sure.
Yeah.
Now, how much? So I grew up Italian, so my family's just. We have bottles of.
They
olive
drink
oil.
it.
Yeah, we have it on everything. How much do people who get this kind of optimal effects from olive oil? How much they consume?
I would look at it as total percentage of diet. So if I were to say 2 to 3 tablespoons a day for the average person, I think that would be probably pretty good overall advice. But that's on, let's say, like 1,800 calories a day.
Oh, I see.
You know, like what if you're eating 3,600? Well, yeah, 5 or 6 tablespoons might be totally appropriate just because of the total percentage that we're looking at of fat.
Now, talking about fatty acids, is it a big enough difference considering somebody eats a lot of meat and they've been eating meat for a long time? Is it a big enough difference when something is grass-fed versus, grain-fed? Because I know it does change the fatty acid composition of meat a little. It's not a huge difference, but it changes it a little. Is it enough to make a difference to say grass-fed, that'll make a big difference, I'll stick to grass-fed?
It actually makes an enormous difference.
Okay.
I very rarely, I actually will never eat meat in my own home that is not grass-fed because I can control it. But let's say we went out to dinner.
That's my rule.
Like there's no restaurant that serves grass-fed meat.
No.
Almost none. There was one in Boston. Like that was it. And they only had one cut of steak and that was it. Like that's what they got. And so it's fine. So like if that's my flex meal, cheat meal, whatever you want to call it, I'm just enjoying dinner out with my friends. Like that's just what's going to be, or my family. But it's not even close. So it's about a 17 to 18 to 1 of omega-6s to omega-3s. But not only that, the arachidonic acid is multiples higher. So if you're eating meat right now or processed meat that is not grass-fed and grass-finished, because the big thing is for the last 3 to 6 months, they're taking these grass-fed cows and they're just grain finishing them to add another 300-400 pounds for sale. And they make it more marble and it's tastier. Like grain-fed meat is just tastier than, for most people believe this, than grass-fed. I believe that. But I still eat the grass-fed because it's not even close. It's somewhere between a 3 to 5 to 1 of omega-6s to omega-3s
Wow, that's a
versus
big difference.
17 to 18.
5x? Wow.
It's about a 5x.
That's a huge difference.
Huge difference.
Wow. Okay,
I didn't
good.
realize
But it even goes deeper than that because you're getting like 10 grams less fat per steak
That's true.
than you would grain-fed.
Anybody who's had it, you could taste that.
That's
You
look,
could tell.
to be honest, like grain-fed meat is just, it does taste better. It's tasty. It's got more.
That's why there's so
marbling,
much
fat.
resistance to it. Now, let's be honest.
There's more fat, and the fat makes it have more flavorful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really how
I remember years ago when grass-fed started becoming a thing. My dad, who came to this country when he was 19, he goes, "Oh, it's so weird." He goes, a lot of meat was grass-fed back then, and we used to have to look for grain-fed because it tastes so good, and that was more expensive. Now it's the reverse. I'm like, oh my god, markets are funny, aren't they?
It is. And it's more expensive, but again, we're talking about your health, and this is one of the most important things.
I love that. You have the exact same rule that I have, and we've talked about it on the show before. When I'm cooking from home, I do all of our, butcher box, grass fed. That's what I always do. If I go out to a restaurant, then obviously I'm going to enjoy grain fed.
Same. So how do we test for inflammation then? How can someone, besides symptoms, I feel stiff and achy and flu-like symptoms or whatever, what kind of testing can we get to see what what inflammation looks like for us?
So once a year, when you go to your PCP, you go to your doctor, you want to ask them to run your HS-CRP. That's your high sensitivity C-reactive protein, HS-CRP. A lot of doctors will, some won't, some will just run CRP. CRP is good enough if that's all that you can get. That tests acute inflammation in your body, but it does not tell you in any way, shape, or form what it's coming from. It typically means like potential autoimmune, potential immunological issues, low levels of antioxidants, high levels of inflammation. So that's really important that we test for that. If there's any rheumatoid arthritis, things like that in your family, they might test for things like sedimentation rate, ESR. That's great to look at. Very few people are actually going to go into the inflammatory markers. So when we talk about these things today, omega-6s, why are they inflammatory? They're creating a specific series of prostaglandins, series 2. They're creating something called leukotrienes. They're creating thromboxanes. And so very rarely, if ever, will a doctor ever test those. So besides that, besides very high levels of LDL, but I actually don't even just look at LDL at all anymore. I'm looking at VLDL. I'm looking at I'm looking at ApoE genotype. I'm looking at ApoB. So like all of those things matter. So a complete lipid profile, again, that starts to get more expensive. What I recommend is this, keeping just normal cholesterol levels. I don't think that that's a radical approach. And then also looking at your omega-6 to omega-3 levels, which can be run through a phlebotomist-based blood draw, or even easier now, at-home lab tests, which we've done now for over a decade, which you just take a couple drops of blood like you would for your blood sugar, and it will show you a breakdown of your omega-6s to your omega-3s. But even more so, and I just think this is just important, you're going to see it on your labs here today, it will show your arachidonic acid versus your EPA. So your most inflammatory fatty acid, we'll call it that, versus your most anti-inflammatory omega-3. And so when you look at that, now you start to get a much deeper picture as to, oh, omega-3s look decent, but my arachidonic acid is just way too high.
So there's a ratio. There's like a ratio we're looking for. That's ideal.
3-to-1 is ideal.
Okay.
Yep. 3-to-1 will actually reduce. So it's 3-to-1, and then it's what's called a 9% saturation rate in your blood of omega-3s, meaning like total omega-3s. And that actually reduces risk for sudden cardiac death by 90%.
Holy cow.
It's the most remarkable marker I've ever seen.
Holy cow.
Did any of us hit it? Did any of us hit it?
Sorry to say that. But you will.
I'm not
so
confident
basically,
about this
there's things that you can do that we guarantee that you will hit that within 12 weeks. We guarantee it.
Oh, sweet.
So when somebody comes to you, they do, because so for people who don't, we did labs with you, and and we haven't seen the results. So you're gonna, like we did last time, you're gonna bring them out and tell us kind of what what's going on. But if somebody comes to you, does these labs, and their inflammation doesn't look good, and then they, through changing their diet, lifestyle, get those numbers to look good, what do they notice and how they feel? Do they feel different?
Without a doubt. So there's overall, when you wake up, you have more energy, less stiffness, less pain, less grogginess. When you have high levels of inflammation, you're in a lower mood typically. You don't have an interest really in exercise because you have that exercise intolerance, meaning like, I'm going to get sore from this, or I'm going to be run down. So it affects cognitive function, mood, and overall energy. So all three of those should improve.
You generally feel much better.
Generally, because you're just not as swollen. Like you're literally not as inflamed.
Awesome.
And whenever that happens, you're going to feel better.
All right. You guys ready to get into these labs here?
All right.
I think the score right now, I think Justin's leading. I think we've all been,
Don't worry,
me and Doug have all been hammered.
No, I haven't
Justin
been hammered
did have
yet.
the best scores for the
balanced out.
Yeah, Justin, I think
was
Justin's
it the
winning.
hormones?
Yeah, the
I think it was the
hormones.
hormones.
I'm pretty sure
yeah.
Justin's winning. Dude.
I didn't get hammered. I remember Doug did with the stress
Well,
one.
by hammered, I mean I think you at one, each of us have had.
I'm pretty sure, but I don't think I've ever been at the bottom.
We didn't get your hormones.
That's the only one.
That's right. Yeah, he avoided that.
Yeah. No, I sent it in. I don't bleed very easily. You know what I mean? I ain't got time to bleed.
No time to bleed.
What movie is that? Anybody?
I have no idea.
Predator.
Predator.
One of the best movies of all time. Yeah.
I was going to say Commando. But
That's when Jesse Ventura gets shot. He's like, "You shot. You're bleeding. I ain't got time to bleed."
Great movie.
That's a real man right there.
That's funny. He's still around. He's still doing his thing.
He is. He's all into the weird.
Now, because this is like, is this test number 3 or 4 we've done with you?
This is 3, right?
Pretty sure it's 3.
I
We
think
did the minerals and metals test.
Minerals
we
and
did the
metals.
hormones test, which was like really
and
comprehensive.
then there was a stress test, or was that the?
Well, no, that was part of the minerals, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Now, are there things that make a difference for you reading our test because you have all 3 versus just doing it one single isolated test? Like, is it
Great question. Yeah, so we're kind of working through our what's called Big 5.
okay?
So we have something called the Big 5 labs, and it tests your food sensitivities, your hormones, tests your mineral levels, your vitamin levels, your gut function, and what else is the one that I'm missing? Yeah, vitamins, minerals, heavy metals, all of those things. So we have done now the minerals and metals tests for your mineral levels and your heavy metals. We've done your hormones, which looks at cortisol, testosterone, kind of made some tweaks there too.
Yeah.
Like just really sharing with guys too, because there's a lot of great clinics that are popping up, is to, if you're doing testosterone replacement therapy or anything like that, is that you're checking your levels to make sure they are good, which I know you guys are. And instead of just doing it once a week, hopefully you start to do it multiple times a week.
Yep.
And so you don't get the highs and the lows. You just get, and you do a little bit less. And so you don't have to go real high so that it stays normal by the end of the week. You can actually just go moderate, and you stay moderate like every, third, fourth day.
Yeah. So, Adam's waiting for the poop test. He's so excited about that.
That is the one I want to do. I want to do I want to do the gut one with you more than anything.
Anyone with, previous autoimmune, skin, like
Yeah, that's
any
me.
immune things. Yeah, absolutely. We got
That's why I want to
All
get to that. For
All right,
sure.
let's look at inflammation.
All right, so this lab, this amazing lab, again, we're looking at lipids, we're looking at fats. Ideal ratio is 3-to-1, 5-to-1 is fantastic if you can get there. Anything over 10-to-1, not ideal. So let's get into it. So I'm going to go from the what's the best way to say this? Because we're all friends here.
Yeah,
the most egregious,
Biggest offender.
the biggest offender. I like that, and then we'll work down. But again, like I said, these can be corrected within 6 to 8 weeks, but definitely within 12 weeks.
All right, say it,
And
Doc.
so-
Come on.
All right, so Justin is up first.
Oh man!
Justin's
Finally,
Yeah.
finally. know it.
Wait, hold on.
My rise in the
always
sun.
swings.
Would you say
is
about
over.
dairy earlier?
Cheese master.
That's where it's coming from.
That's all it
I
is.
knew that. That's why he's talking. I'm like, dude, I'm like so high dairy and meat. Those are the two like
his
biggest.
entire diet.
I am not a fish guy either.
So he gets cheese shaped like broccoli.
Okay, lay it on me. Let's go.
All right. So when we look at the control, so every study has to have a control to know the range you're kind of working against. Average American 8.1-to-1 for the omega-6 to the omega-3. You were an 11.3. So we're above the 10. So we know that we need to get that down because again, even if you're not feeling a lot of these symptoms that we just spoke about, the mind, mood, and energy, we want to be able to improve that cardiovascular wise. Like I said, reduce that risk for sudden cardiac death. So then we get to the arachidonic acid. Remember, the most inflammatory. So just real quick, omega-6s flow from linoleic acid. Basically, that's in like the nuts and seeds. It's not as offensive. And then we move to DGLA. DGLA, people actually supplement with for mood and energy. I wouldn't recommend that, but there's actually anti-inflammatory benefits from that. And then arachidonic acid is more from the meats, cheeses that we just spoke about now.
Where does CLA fall on that?
Conjugated linoleic acid is not part of that family, different fatty acid.
Got it.
But
Okay.
yeah, fantastic in its own right for fat burning, et cetera. So when we look at the arachidonic acid to EPA, so again, now omega-3s goes from ALA, alpha linoleic acid. That's from your flax, your walnuts, your chia seeds, things like that, even some olive oil. Then we go to EPA, and then we go to DHA. Okay, so we're kind of matching them up because if you take in more EPA, what does it do? It actually lowers AA, arachidonic acid. So really powerful to overpower it.
So there's a ratio we're looking at.
Always a ratio. And so average American, 18.3-to-1. Not good, right? Because that's very, very inflamed. You're a 19. So you're right up there, which we never want with your fellow Americans. So we have to reduce that for sure.
He's always trying to beat
Oh
everybody.
my
That's what's
God,
happening.
I was going
Wrong
for
way.
those big numbers.
Well, you won for sure. Yep. So you get those levels.
So you're talking about eating more on like in terms of
Less
getting
cheese,
that.
bro.
More
Less
fish,
cheese,
bro.
bro.
He
Less
Balance
cheese.
it. Right. So like that's the thing. So if you'd love
Talking about
cheese,
walnuts and all, like I'm just
Well, so
in
we
terms
could-
of like options.
He's like,
for
what
me.
else can I eat besides getting rid of my cheese? Dude?
Exactly.
That's the real fucking
How do I
question he wants to
counter
ask
this?
you, Doc.
Well, so
Shave
we'll
it
talk about
down.
cheese. If not everybody's eating a lot of cheese right now,
He
so
eats bricks of cheese.
Listen.
He walks,
Yeah.
just walks around with that.
No,
in his
you
back.
should
see all the studies
I bet you
people
if you checked his pockets right now, he's got
Send
a
me to
brick in there
promote
right now.
that it's great for health. So I don't know what you guys are
but-
We're
talking
such
about.
assholes. I swear.
we always want to look at it like this: is like I'm not anti-meat. I'm not even anti-arachidonic acid. It's always like if a little is good, a lot doesn't necessarily make it better.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that's what
of
tips it,
course.
right? And so one thing for cheese though, just make sure it's grass-fed, right? Coming from grass-fed cows, or go with buffalo mozzarella, buffalo cheese can be a great one. And goat and sheep-based cheese is much healthier, less inflammatory, far less inflammatory than cow's based.
Okay.
Yeah. So
All
go.
the ones you don't like.
But then, even if you
that.
love your cheese, you might just reduce a little bit, but then you'll do more omega-3s to balance it. It's
So
all
like-
again, it's about balance.
So like fish.
yeah, some fish would be
Yeah, dude.
probably your
Cool.
best choice. We can go, and then again, for people, I know there's a lot of people that aren't going to eat fish, and it's not all fish. So it's like it's your mackerel, your sardines, your anchovies, your wild salmon, your wild trout, and those are oily fish. And if people aren't eating those, then we just give them 2
Supplement.
grams of an daily omega-3.
There you go, bro.
But it's higher EPA, really important.
that.
So just quick on supplements, don't take any fish oil. You have to make sure it's cold processed
Yeah.
and that it's tested for heavy metals. Because if not, it's oxidized just like a regular omega-6 polyunsaturated fat.
It's now.
and then it's not good.
It's now inflammatory.
That's right.
What?
Yeah.
So that's why you can't just buy something at Costco.
Okay, what
So you put
percentage
them in
would
the
you say are like that
refrigerator?
are on the market?
90%.
What?
Unless it's a functional medicine brand, like pick your favorite brand. Obviously, I formulate for Equilife, but pick your favorite functional medicine brand. They're going to do cold process.
90%?
They're going to be testing for mercury, and the other brands are doing it as cheap as possible. And here's the thing: they use hexane. They use literally solvents
Yes.
to create them. It's awful.
Yeah.
So,
So,
wait, okay. So, I mean, are they almost like irrelevant then taking them? I mean, if someone's
Doing
taking,
yourself
If it's a
more
shitty
harm
one,
than
they
good.
may as well. Well, I mean, 90%. I mean, that's a lot, bro.
bro, so let me ask you this. So one thing that I learned from a friend of mine who's in your space is she said, poke the capsule, smell it. If it smells rancid or bad, it's not good.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a bad idea.
And then she also told me to freeze them or put them in the refrigerator to keep them.
You can. Yeah. So the biggest thing about your oils, and that includes fish oil as well, let's say olive oil, is that you want it in a dark bottle. So most supplements, you're going to do that. So that's easy, right? You want it in a cool space, and you want it not sensitive to light. So basically dark bottle, covered bottle, keep it in your fridge if you want. You don't have to. We've been using omega-3s in my practice for probably 15, maybe even longer years. And again, you just want to go with the right brand. The right brand will take your numbers, Justin, and just drop them into the healthy zone within 12 weeks. And it's only 2 soft gels. That's all that it is. But here's what you want to look for. There on the back of it, you'll see total omega-3s, and then you'll see EPA and DHA. So you want total omega-3s above 2 grams, and you want EPA to be at least double that of DHA.
So 2 to 1 EPA to DHA.
Or even higher, yes.
Okay.
Because here's why. Not that DHA isn't important. DHA is great for the nervous system, etc. But EPA easily converts to DHA, but DHA does not easily convert back up to EPA.
Oh, okay.
So that's why we've run tens of thousands of these labs. This is how we found out about it, because we used to use higher DHA to EPA, which most omega-3s are. We're like, oh, DHA is way up, but EPA is not. Found the one product, and then we ended up formulating our own to be 2.5 to 1, and then that changed everything. Wow. Yeah, without a doubt. So
What
it's
about
great.
fermented fish oil? I've seen fermented fish oil with like they add butter to it or something like that. Is that what's the deal with that?
I'm not a fermented fish oil guy. There's some decent research behind it. Here's why I'm not, because fermented foods don't work for a lot of people with gut issues or inflammatory issues.
Okay.
Because they have higher levels of histamines.
And that's going to trigger more histamine.
Absolutely. So
Got
skin
it.
issues, headaches, high blood pressure.
Got it.
So I just don't do it. And also they tend to be a little bit more oxidized.
Got it. Okay.
I just want cold processed, small bottles, not the Costco bottle. So you use it within 30 days and you're done. And then
Beautiful.
you just get the next
See?
one. It's like
Gotta take a supplement, bro.
Yeah,
I know,
it's like
I'm on
literally.
it.
Yeah.
Or again, the brightly colored fruits and vegetables, I still definitely recommend that, right? They have phytonutrients besides just the omega-3s that are anti-inflammatory as well. All right, so next up is Doug. And
Looks like Adam and I might be.
you are 7.6 on your omega-6s to omega-3, so not bad at all. Doug, typically people are living a healthy lifestyle. They're going to come in between the 6s and 7s. That's what I see in my practice.
Okay.
So if you're not supplementing, you're just eating fish every once in a while, but you're eating a healthy, balanced diet, you're typically a 6 or 7.
Got it.
And that's not bad. Now, your arachidonic acid, though, should be below a 10. It will be always a little higher typically. Yours is a 15. So AA to EPA is a 15. So all that means is that your EPA intake, which is really you're only going to get from fish or a fish oil supplement, to be honest with you. Like that's the only effective way that we've seen. We need to reduce that. So you're 15 right now. So we'll get that down. Though I'll tell you, food-based is taking a meal that you would typically do meat at. Like let's just say lunch. I have a lot of clients that do this, and they get wild caught sardines in the can. They have packed in olive oil. Portuguese. My background's Portuguese and Italian, so I know a little bit about this previous, which I didn't know it had health benefits to it. And you take those and you just plop it on, a bed of rice that already has the olive oil in it, or a salad if you want to do low carb. And if you do that 3 to 4 times a week, it'll raise your levels naturally. You want it to supplement.
Okay.
So
it's a question on the sardines, though. They're smoked typically, right?
a lot are smoked, not all, but you're right. And they are, some come boneless and skinless. And so you don't get as much benefit from the skinless. Boneless is great to get because then you don't have to eat around the bones. And you can actually eat the bones of sardines. They're very small.
Yeah.
They provide a lot of calcium.
Yep.
So.
Okay. And then the olive oil that comes in the sardine can, I can only guess is maybe not the best quality.
I agree with you. I don't use that as my olive oil. I just try to make it easy for like first level steps, but I would drain it and then I would add my own healthy olive oil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
All those times you guys made fun of me for eating sardines. Huh?
Now they make sardines in tomato. They do them all sorts of different types of things. So
I've never tried this. Like part of me wants to try it just because of what we're talking about.
I ate the sardines because I like the protein, but then also the fatty acid, and they're cheap. This is the thing.
right.
Sardines are inexpensive, and they don't taste bad. People confuse sardines with anchovies. Anchovies, which I also like, but that's the strong tasting one.
Yes.
Anchovies are not strong tasting. They taste pretty good. And if you put them on, or excuse me, sardines, if you put them on some food, on some vegetables, add some olive oil, it's actually really good.
Yeah, I would give it a shot if people are willing to do it, and it's very inexpensive. Like you just said, a couple dollars, you get your protein for your lunch.
Great source of protein.
All right, so we've got Doug, and next up is Sal.
Oh, you beat me. Bam! Wow, look at that.
So Sal, you're at a 7.1 for your omega-6s to omega-3s. So
Okay.
again, starting out pretty well, especially for no supplementation and probably not a lot of fish.
Yep.
Your arachidonic acid was the highest though.
Oh, yeah.
To EPA, it's 22.2.
Yeah.
So quite high.
Yeah. I ate a lot of meat.
And well, actually, one thing we didn't talk about is that arachidonic acid is much higher in organ meats. So if you've been adding liver to your diet or things like that,
I do that.
Quite high in purines, which we won't get into today, but in arachidonic acid. And so it's at least something
supplementing
to be
with the
mindful
fish oil
of.
would help with that for me.
Yes.
Okay.
And this would be a good case study because I only ever give people low dose fish oil, so 2 grams, but you might, depending if you have a higher level of meat, you might need 3 grams. We're not talking about like 50 grams of fish oil.
Yeah.
We're talking about just one more. And so for you, I would retest in 12 weeks after just doing 2 grams a day and then see if that's the right, because it's always about, if you find this out now, you really never need to retest again in your life. If you keep the same diet. That's the great thing about this type of lab.
Got it.
So you retest once, find out you're at the perfect level, you're good. Like you just move on to like, what's the next thing? All right. So that is that. And the last thing I want to share with people is about game meat. Game meat is typically much lower, oftentimes in arachidonic acid and saturated fats. Again, I know that we're not having a discussion around saturated fats today. Again, there's a lot of benefits to it. Overdoing it, some people don't do as well. But that could be a really nice thing, is doing buffalo sometimes, doing elk sometimes. Those things can be great. Venison is lower in it unless you eat the dark meat of the venison, which is then higher in arachidonic acid.
Okay.
Where's veal land?
It's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah,
That's not a game meat.
No.
You don't see too many veal running around.
It's a good question. How is it fed? Usually they're fattened, right? So they're probably not being grass fed and all that, although they would not be typically as grass fed, right?
it's
Because they're
delicious.
drinking milk.
Yeah, no, that's what I was asking because I eat it. I like it. So
Yeah. All right. So Adam is last. In this case, I guess first, right? So it is 6.5. So coming in, I think, right at that normal, healthy starting level, close to the 5-to-1. We want to get you down to 3-to-1. And even for arachidonic acid to EPA, we want to get you to 3-to-1 too. And so you are at 9.9. So you're right below the 10. So that's good. So I actually had a question for you then. What are you doing maybe different than the other 3 guys that might be keeping your arachidonic acid levels a little bit lower?
You're
Do
the
you
most
not eat as much
consistent
meat?
with fish.
yeah, I eat a lot. I eat a lot of sushi. So sushi's on a pretty regular.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest difference.
You at least once or twice a week have fish.
Yeah, I'm pretty good about. I'm pretty good.
I'd
about
say
that.
you eat more fish than I know. I rarely ever eat fish. Doug eats fish.
Yeah, but some weeks I don't. you know.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
I'm pretty consistent, and I even though I haven't been supplementing with my omegas, I've been inconsistent with that. But that's kind of my thing, is if I don't do fish 2 or 3 times a week, I try and at least get the omegas. That's because I'm not very good with being consistent with supplements. But yeah, I'd say probably the fish.
I
also.
go ahead.
The other thing that's how much of your training level could affect some of these. Like if I had like a much higher volume of training or a lower volume of training, because the other thing I'd say that's different about these guys, I'm probably training the least. So I don't know if that's impacting it at all. I'm doing sauna and cold plunge stuff more often than these guys right now. But that's other than that, I'd say we eat pretty similar.
Do you eat the same? The exercise shouldn't really affect this to the same degree. It's typically food consumption based. Do you eat less total food or less total meat?
Yeah, I would say I'm lower calorie than these guys right now. Too.
It's
Because I'm
total
not
body.
exercising, I'm really low. I've incorporated fasting more often than I normally would. So yeah, I'm staying pretty low calorie. So maybe that too.
Yeah, to kind of bring it all home is that to reduce inflammation, we talked a lot about nutrition, and so that's the biggest part that you can do. But, reducing your overall alcohol consumption, smoking in general, highly inflammatory, getting enough sleep that I know hopefully we talk about in the future. Like these things are really, really powerful, but it is important that you do exercise a couple times a week, at least 3. Like that's the bare minimum for most people. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Try not to ever get more than 2 days off in a row because that helps to modulate inflammation. Okay. So even when you have these higher levels maybe of omega-6s or arachidonic acids, what do? They're going to create these prostaglandins in the body. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, if you exercise, you can modulate that faster. So you can clear the inflammation to a greater degree. So I think that's why like exercise is wildly overlooked. Besides just obviously for aesthetic-based purposes, it does so much for health and longevity. And then the last thing is the anti-inflammatory diet. So I mean, just kind of going back to that, I've used vegan-based fish oils for people that are on a vegan-based diet. You need to use quite a bit. They use a lot of solvents to create them out of algae. And so we've looked at even formulating our own. We can't do it in a natural way, so we're just not doing it. So fish oil is going to be the biggest game changer. Again, 2.5 to 1 EPA to DHA formula. And then the other part is incorporating, if you can, fish 3 to 4 times a week. But then the other part to that, I feel like it's important to note, is that you need to make sure that you are not getting a lot of the higher mercury fish or farm-raised fish.
Okay.
Farm-raised fish. So if you just eat regular salmon, it doesn't count. There's actually higher levels of omega-6s in salmon than omega-3s.
It's like beef.
Yeah, exactly. And it's why, well, what's farm-raised fish fed? It's fed inflammatory-based foods, corn and soy and believe it or not, things like Skittles and stuff like that, which is pretty wild. Yeah. Have you ever seen the studies showing that they feed cows Skittles?
What?
No.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We can go deep into that if you want.
I mean, I was in the dairy industry for a long time.
I found it absolutely ridiculous. The only reason anybody ever found out is they were doing this massive Skittle delivery to a farm, and we're talking about an entire like dump truck of Skittles ended up on the road. And so like, well, these aren't in bags. What's this going on here? When the Skittles are expiring or expired, they put it into animal-based feed.
No way.
And the reason they do that is it spikes those blood sugar levels. It makes them even hungrier. They eat even more. But can you imagine all the dyes and the paints and everything going into those animals, and then people are eating but they won't do that at a grass-fed
I have
farm.
never heard that before.
Yeah. So like, I mean, they'll feed other animals. They'll feed chicken feed to chickens. It's like, it's really, it's not ideal.
Wow.
Anything goes with grain-fed farms.
Yeah. Is it safe to say that exercise helps the body have a healthy inflammatory response? It kind of trains the inflammatory system to be more balanced, right? And then that works. And then you mentioned I know my arachidonic acid is high. I exercise quite a bit. I'm like 5-6 days a week, an hour, quite intense. Does that reduce the potential negatives of that arachidonic acid being so high?
Well, if we're looking at the arterial damage that may take place, cardiovascular work would actually help with the flexibility.
Got it.
So that's why for body transformation, I don't really believe that cardiovascular work is ever really needed, although walking or low intensity cardio is great for fat loss and just moving the body. But if you do cardio, even just for 15 to 20 minutes, a few days a week, it helps with cardiovascular flexibility, which is what you want. So you want those arteries to not be as stiff, and you actually can pull more calcium into your bloodstream doing anaerobic based work. So like the more I've been in this industry, the more I'm like, the young 22-year-old me, always talk down on aerobic based cardio, but now I see the benefit in terms of longevity, and so I think that matters. And I think that we need to just look at that in an overall picture. Again, not saying it does phenomenal things for body transformation, but it does if you want to live to, 90, 100 years old for sure.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Cabral, this has been great, man.
I wanted to share this too, and I know we talked about this before the show, but we're going to do a limited amount of the labs, and it's at stephencabral.com/inflammation for your community. They can actually get one of these labs, just pay for shipping, and it's for first-time lab customers only. So I wanted to share that.
So first come, first serve? First come, first serve.
Obviously we have a limit to what we can do, but I believe that labs like this, more people need to be talking about them. Yeah. And to get your numbers, like now that you know your numbers, you can't unlearn them. And now you can actually just do simple things to be able to do it.
Excellent.
Fix
Perfect.
It. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that offer. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to teach you everything you need to know to build a strong, well-developed chest.
When I think of weak points and areas that I struggled with developing for a really long time, chest was up there with the
Yeah, it was for me. It was for me for sure. I got more caught up in the weight I could lift versus how I was developing my body.
I think it's one of the most challenging muscles to develop for most people because the form and technique.